we spent some time Thursday watching the videos, and they actually did a really good job talking about the blood. There's a lot of that information that we're going to see in this chapter. When we talk about blood, blood is an essential component to life, because blood, it's going to be the way that materials can move to the actual cell. And everything that we've talked about to this point has been at the cellular level. So blood, to say that it's essential, I think is a little bit of an understatement. Also, blood is going to be the #1 component of what's termed the cardiovascular system, and it's going to be very good at telling you things that could be wrong with someone's health. A lot of times you go to the doctor or you go to the hospital or whatever the case might be, one of the first things they're going to want to do is draw blood and run tests. When we talk about this circulatory system, now note, even though blood is a component of the cardiovascular system, at this point we're looking at it as part of this vascular, this circulatory route, this information that it's going to be covering. So, we're going to look at this component, and the system overall, okay, is how this blood is going to be moving. When we say cardiovascular, we're talking the blood and the heart only. So you'll see it termed vascular. You'll see it termed circulatory. You'll see it termed cardiovascular. Even in specialties that are out there, you'll see vascular specialists. You'll see cardio specialists. So it's actually separated out there in the world of medicine. People who study the blood are termed hematologists. That is a huge area of study. People go to school just to be hematologists. I think it would be extremely exciting, okay, because when you can look under a scope and determine something that might be wrong with a person, I just think that that's amazing. Now, the functions of the system, we need it for transport, we need it for protection, we need it for regulation. Transport, oxygen, CO2, gases, nutrients, waste, hormones, stem cells. Have you ever thought about that? For blood. Because stem cells is a huge area of controversy in this country. Okay, it shouldn't be, but it is. All right, and because of the controversy, we've set ourselves way back in the study of medicine. Okay, but stem cells are very important to a lot of the things that our body does. For the protection, inflammation, limiting the spread of infection, destroy organisms that are trying to invade us, cancer cells, neutralize toxins, initiate clotting, regulation, fluid balance, pH, extracellular fluid, temperature control. All of this is for the homeostasis of the body. Blood is extremely important in helping us maintain that homeostasis. In the adult, we usually have 4 to 6 liters of blood at any point in time. Do you remember from chapter 5 or 6, I can't remember right off the top of my head now, that this was a liquid connective tissue? Do you remember connective tissues? Okay. This one is a liquid connective tissue. A lot of times people do not associate blood with being a tissue, but it is. The difference is it's just a liquid. The matrix is liquid. So we're going to have this huge makeup of this substance. The substance contains the plasma. Plasma is going to be what's termed the matrix of the blood. It's a clear, light yellowish fluid when separated out. Formed elements, those are the blood cells, and then cell fragments. That's going to be red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets. And when we begin to look at these formed elements, the cellular portion, there's 7 kinds of elements. Erythrocytes, another term for red blood cells. Platelets, they are simply a fragment. They're not a cell. Okay? They are a fragment that's found in the blood. They come from a really cool cell that sits in the bone marrow. Just love that cell. It is pretty cool. Now, the leukocytes, the white blood cells, we divide them into these 2 categories. Either they are considered to be a granulocyte or an agranulocyte. What does the term granulo mean to you? You think of granules, little pieces. Now, in the grand scheme of things, they both contain granules. It's just that when they were discovered, we didn't have the advanced technology that we do now, and it looked like one of them didn't. So that's why they were termed the A granulo, because A means what? Without. When we begin to look at them under the scopes, they look like there are these little pieces that exist in them. So our granulocytes, the ones that look like they have the granules, these are our neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils. Each of these has a specific job that they have to do. With the A granulocytes, those are going to be our lymphocytes and our monocytes. Once again, each one having a specific job they have to do. Now, these are considered our white blood cells. What comes to mind when you hear that term? Fighting an infection. This picture, I think, is in your lab manual. I think it's in your textbook because it's a representation of these agranulo, red blood cells, and platelets that exist. Now, red blood cells, to me, when he was talking about them being concave, on each side, it's just easier for me to look at those and go, those look like a donut. Okay, because I love donuts. All right. The platelets are the little fragments, those little pieces, but those are very important. Okay, what do platelets help do? Clot the blood. That is extremely important. Now, the white blood cells, there is a normal concentration for each one of these that should be in the blood. It's the reason that if you get sick, you go to the doctor, they draw the blood, and they get to check and see how many of these might be present. And then, if there's more than there should be, chances are you've got an infection. Okay? Because if the white blood cell count goes up, that's usually what that means. There's an infection. Now, go to the doctor, they're like, oh, well, you know, you tell them your ear is hurting, they check the blood, got more white cells, and they're like, oh, you got ear infection. Throw you on some antibiotics, send you home. Chances are you're going to be okay. But if you're not, they need to do a little more detail with this. Because then they'll need to determine which white blood cell is higher than it should be. And that's a differential white blood cell count. And that can help them pinpoint the one that's more prevalent, because each one of these has a specific job. For example, if you were sick, they did this, did the differential, found out eosinophils are too high. You might be infected with a parasite, because they know that's what eosinophils fight. Does that make sense? Okay, so these are very indicative of our overall health, and it's a reason that the blood is so important. I liked the little centrifuge that, who was the guy that we watched? What's his site called? Crash Course. I kind of liked the little centrifuge that he had, showed the tube of blood going in, getting spun around, pulled out, and it had the 3 layers. And yes, that's what they do. They'll take the blood, they'll centrifuge it down, and you'll get the 3 layers. Worked in a lab where I had to deal with blood. And this is one of the things that was pretty huge that we worked with. But then we went on to do other tests on it. We tested the plasma and stuff like that. Now, when the blood separates out, if you remember, one of the things that he pointed out, the heaviest components sort to the bottom. This little area right here, the buffy coat, settles out second, plasma last on top. Now, in this area right here, that is strictly our count of the red blood cells. Roughly 45% of the blood count should be just the red blood cells. Now, the buffy coat, this should be less than 1%. But let's say we centrifuged it down, but the buffy coat came out like that. What would that be telling you? There's a whole lot of the leukocytes present. Okay? The plasma should be about 55% of the blood makeup of this collection of the blood. So when we begin to look at this, when they draw your blood, do this procedure, This is termed a hematocrit. And sometimes you'll hear the doctor say, draw a hematocrit. Just a little, you get the little prick on the finger, and they have the little tube, and it draws up the blood, and they take it, and they centrifuge it down. This is what they look at. All right? When I was growing up, going to the pediatrician, for some reason, I remember that because they loved to stick our fingers for some reason. And I hated it. I can remember as a little kid, you have a little prick on the finger, and you'd be like, ow, and you just didn't like it. But anyway, that would be our hematocrit. In this plasma portion, the plasma portion, when we say it's a complex mixture, that's an understatement. This complex mixture, it's going to contain water, proteins, my globulins.
So, globulin transport white blood cells, right? Do they bind to it?
Wait, whoa, back up. Globulin transport white blood cells.
Would they?
Why are you putting the two together? And that has absolutely nothing to do with the white blood cell. That's going to have something to do with just that globe that's going to be present. So you're probably thinking immuno, and when we hear immune, we tend to put that together with the white blood cells because that's the way that system is put together. But when we talk about the proteins of the blood, we're strictly going to be referring to a globe, to that globulin, to that glob of something in that plasma. Okay? The proteins. Nutrients. What type of nutrients might we find? Those are my electrolytes. Salt is an electrolyte. What could be considered a nutrient? No, oxygen is carried on my red blood cell. What could be considered a nutrient that the cells of your body would need? Huh? The carbs, they're pretty much going to fly around on their own, but they are nutrient. We could have some vitamins, okay? We could have our amino acids, okay? See how there's a little bit of a difference there in the terminology? Okay, so there's a little bit of a difference there. Nitrogenous waste. What's a nitrogenous waste? First of all, let's break the term down. Nitrogen. Now, what in the body would give us a nitrogenous waste? This would be when we are using amino acids, breaking them down, that sort of thing, and getting the waste product, for example. All right, so nitrogenous waste. Hormones. We just finished a great big huge chapter on hormones. Well, let's think about, okay, we've got the stimulating ones, but these are our chemical messengers. Remember that? For hormones? Okay. One of the things that they're going to need, what are they going to need? Well, some of them. What are they going to need in the blood to travel? One of my proteins. All right. Gases. Oxygen can only be carried by my red blood cell. Don't think of any other thing when you hear the term oxygen. If you hear oxygen, think red blood cell. If you hear red blood cell, think oxygen. Now, something that I wish he hadn't said in the video, because it gives the wrong idea. It's partly correct, okay? But for the most part, he said CO2. Where does CO2, that the red blood cells carry CO2? Okay, do you guys remember him saying that? Yes and no. Okay. Where do we get the CO2 from? No. What process at the cellular level makes CO2? It is not from our lungs. In other words, you don't pick up the CO2 and carry it around your body. The cells of your body produce the CO2. What process in the cell makes the CO2?
Respiration.
Say that again, please.
Respiration.
My cellular respiration. The process that occurs in the mitochondria, and if we don't have oxygen present, we're going to produce it in anaerobic fermentation. Do you guys remember that? And then if oxygen is present, it moves forward into the mitochondria for aerobic respiration. The waste, the byproduct, is the CO2. Now, in listening or in thinking about what we might already know, we might associate that the red blood cell picks up CO2, carries it back to the lungs. Yes and no. Red blood cells want to deal with oxygen. Another gas will fight the red blood cell for that space on the oxygen, holding oxygen, and that is carbon monoxide. What's the difference? One's a deadly gas. It can kill you. And the way that it kills you, it fights the red blood cell for the space of the oxygen. So rather than getting the oxygen to the cells, it gets the carbon monoxide. Too bad. Okay? Carbon dioxide, the waste that's given off at the cellular level, all right, for the most part, travels dissolved in the plasma, therefore meeting the gases. Does that make sense? So when you think about red blood cell, think oxygen. If you hear oxygen, think red blood cell.